This is the Minnesota Youth Alive podcast, where we talk about empowering the church to reach students at their school and in their community. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hey guys, welcome to the Minnesota Youth Alive podcast. I am here with Christian Kirmeier, real estate person, realtor. You've had hats of many different jobs.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. I'm a real estate agent in the St. Cloud area. I grew up in the St. Cloud area for most of my life. Maybe later I'll share a little bit of some of the movement that happened in there, but St. Cloud for most of my life. And I have worn many different hats. I worked here at the Waters Church for a little bit of time. I worked for an organization in town called Central Minnesota Youth for Christ for 10 years.
Wow.
Working with teenage boys mainly, and for a time there, for probably about the last 4 or 5 years, with a main focus on the general student population at Sauk Rapids High School. That's kind of my current. Do you want me now to go into some of my
tell us about your family. You have a wife.
Yeah.
You have some kids. You can tell us about them.
Yeah,
too.
Great. They're the best to talk about. My wife Sheena. She was the kids pastor here at the Waters Church when we met. She's the best. I don't deserve her, and she's incredible. And we have 3 incredible little kiddos. Maxwell is our oldest. He's 8, and he loves everything I love, which is really fun. And then Selah is our 5-year-old, and she is spunky and full of life. And then Maggie, our littlest one, is 4 months old.
Wow.
And is sweet and a great sleeper, and we're just happy for all of that. So
that's awesome. Well, our paths have crossed in many different ways. They've passed through church here at the Waters Church, but also I've seen you at Sauk Rapids, see you at the polls in the past. Yeah. I'd love for you to share just a little bit about, I believe you're talking about Band of Brothers is what you were doing at Youth for Christ. And for those who don't know what Youth for Christ is, can you just give a quick explanation of what Youth for Christ is? Because it kind of crosses over with Youth Alive a little bit, connecting with kids, and then just share a little bit about what you did with the Band of Brothers.
Yeah. So Youth for Christ's mission and goal is to reach the lost kids, and so kids that are not seen maybe by lots of people, that are kind of on the fringes, and are most likely not currently connected to any sort of church, whether through family or through their own means. And so Youth for Christ's mission is to go into the places where students are, like schools and other spaces, to try to reach those kids that aren't currently being reached by the church. And so I'll share a little bit later, but Youth for Christ had a pretty significant impact on my story, and really mattered for me as a teenager. And then I got the opportunity to work for them, specifically running an organization or a group within that called Band of Brothers. And Band of Brothers was a mentoring program where Christian adult men say, hey, we care about teenage boys. We care about helping teenage boys live life to the fullest. And we believe living life to the fullest could have a lot of things in it, but we think without Jesus, there's no way to actually live life to the full. And so we want to introduce these young men to relationship with Jesus and what living life to the full in relationship with Jesus then looks like. And so, I got to lead some incredible men in that space with teenagers for about 10 years. And absolutely loved it. Things like that, focuses like that, men saying, we're going to care about the next generation, and we're going to care about them knowing Jesus, had huge impact on me as a teenager. So getting to not only do that, but to lead other men in doing that was
just a full circle experience.
And probably one of the greatest things I got to be a part of.
Wow. Wow. So, yeah. And, you know, I just love you sharing about Youth for Christ, because Youth for Christ is not just in central Minnesota. No. It's all over the nation.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see the students know how youth ministries happen, but there's many other different organizations out there that they can partner with the church to help reach their schools. And so I love sharing about Youth for Christ, but I would love to get to your testimony.
Yeah.
I want to just share a little reason of why I asked you to be on this podcast. And we've talked about it a little bit, but I was at a life group, and you and Sheena were up sharing just about parenting, and you guys started out with just your testimony. Yeah. And I was in the back, and I was only there for like 15, 20 minutes because I had to run to hockey. But I started here, and I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Like this story has to be told more. So you've shared a little bit that Youth for Christ has made an impact in your life. Share just your story, your testimony.
Yeah. So I think when I've shared my story in a few different spaces, one thing we really leaned on when I worked at Youth for Christ is the importance of your story. And so we try to get students to share their stories, both if they know Jesus and if they don't, like the power of your story and how it eventually, if you're not there yet, ties to Jesus, or recognizing what Jesus has done if you do know him is such an important piece. And so and we want to model that as well, right, for students. So I've shared my story in that space a lot of times, and often when I start, I need to, start where most people do, like at the beginning. Something that I've done, and we've already kind of hit here today, which is important to me, is Sheena, Max, Selah, and Maggie are one of the greatest ways that Jesus has shown his love to me. And when I start at the beginning of my story, there's a lot of things that aren't very fun as a part of that story. And I just want to highlight, because sometimes I might get to the end, or we might take a turn somewhere else, but like to first say like what Jesus has done in my story and even just through my family is one of the greatest things. And to think that like my story started where it did and then is here is truly nothing short of a miracle and an example of God's goodness.
Yes, so good.
And so with that being said, I'll start. I was born in St. Cloud. I'm 34 years old. And my parents were 19 and 20 years old when they had me. They were wildly not ready to have a kid. It was not in the plan. They weren't married. They didn't know Jesus. There's so many things. There was also a lot of things present that don't make for a great situation. Drugs and violence and just lots of other things that go with that. And so they weren't ready to have me. Shortly after I came, about a year and a half later, my sister came. They were as not ready as they were for me. And so young adults who are not ready to be adults, who have two kids. And what that brought was there was a lot of dysfunction present, and grew up in things, again, around drug use, around lots of fighting, waking up at night to fighting, different things like this. All sorts of dysfunction. My parents got married when I was 5, and I think a bit of an attempt to like make things better, and then got divorced when I was 8 because things didn't get better. Yeah. there was a lot of moving around between, as you can imagine. People have heard lots of stories of what custody issues look like and different things like that. There was quite a few years where I was with my mom for a while, then I was with my dad, and you think you were living at one place, and then you go to visit another, and then you don't leave because now you're living there, and there was just a lot of that going on. Eventually, we landed with living with my dad in Sauk Rapids. And in Sauk Rapids, we, started more regularly attending school there without some of the back and forth. And it was okay. I would say it was okay. It seemed, I think from my perspective as like a, 10, 11, 12-year-old, like it was maybe fine at home. As I got closer to that 11, 12, 13-year-old range, some of the cracks, I think, in what was going on started to show. I think when you don't know what's different, you don't know that like this is not a good situation or this is dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And so, but what I did know is that as I got into middle school, other kids around me didn't know how to handle some of the things that were present for me. Some of that was that when your parents aren't super involved, and when your dad spends a lot of his time in his room, and you could go weeks maybe without seeing him, and you're kind of left to take care of yourself, things like clean clothes and how to take care of your own hygiene as you're becoming a teenager, how to have clean hair. I would often say that like part of this is just that when I was a teenager, or when I was 11 and 12 years old, I loved Harry Potter. I also looked and probably smelled like however Harry Potter smelled. Awesome. Messy hair and rough clothes that maybe are wearing for a week at a time and things like this. And other 12, 13-year-olds don't know how to respond to that. Bullying was for sure a part of my story, and yet I worked with students for 10 years. And I don't think that bullying is ever okay. And yet sometimes I don't know that students at 11 and 12 years old know how to respond when the kid sitting next to them does not smell good. And he for sure is wearing the same clothes that he was wearing, 4 days ago. And so, all of that to say, I don't hold a lot of resentment there, but it for sure was a piece. And at that time, it was everything. And so I remember most mornings my alarm would go off, and all I would want in the entire world was for it to be shut off and be able to go back to bed, because leaving my room meant entering into the unknown chaos of my home, whether that was, am I going to see my dad? Am I not going to see him? My sister was going through a lot of hard things at that time too, and her response to that was really difficult. And so what sort of chaos was I going to deal with at home? And then the other option was going to school where kids were gonna struggle to be kind. And so I knew I hated school, I knew I hated home, and just going back to bed seemed so much better. One of these particular mornings, I remember getting up, thinking, I don't want to go. I don't want to go out to whatever's outside of my bedroom right now, whether that's at home or at school. But that particular day, I had remembered that somebody, another boy at my school who I kind of knew a little bit, and who wasn't mean to me. It wasn't like I would have necessarily called him a friend at that time, but like he wasn't mean to me, he didn't tease me, and he had invited me to this thing at his church called youth group. And I think the only reason I had interest in going to youth group was because it was something different. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't have a church background in my home. And so I didn't know what I was saying yes to, but the possibility of something different in a life that felt difficult every single day was enough to get me out of bed that day. And so I remember going to school, hard day at school, but I've got this thing to look forward to that could be different. And so I get home, it's raining. My dad's girlfriend at the time, who was living with us, had told me she would drive me up to this thing called youth group. And it was raining. It kind of started to downpour, and she wasn't around to take me at that time. But this church was about a mile away. And so I just desperately, I can't really tell you why at that point I decided that this thing was that important.
You didn't walk, did you?
I did. I desperately needed to get, to get to something different. And so I walked, I got there, and it was just a completely different world than I had experienced anywhere else at that point. I walk in and there's kids running around, having fun, playing dodgeball. Everyone's being kind to everybody. Like, there's games, there's snacks. We sit down at one point to listen to some big bald guy talk about Jesus, and I didn't really know, like, he's reading out of the Bible. Like, okay, like, I at that time I would have said, like, I didn't really understand that piece of it, but everything else was so nice and so different. And so I remember going to leave at the end of the night and like, wow, I think I would do this again. Like, this was different enough. And I like playing dodgeball, and nobody's being mean to me while I'm playing. Like, this seems good. And so I go to walk home, and as I go to walk home, another student comes up to me. At this point, I'm in 7th grade, and Caleb, who's a 10th grader, comes up to me, and he introduces himself and says, "Hey, man, me and my friends are going to Perkins afterwards. Would you like to come with us?" 7th grader, no friends, no idea that that's even a thing. Like, hanging out and going to a restaurant like after, it seems so crazy to me at that point. I have no money. I don't have really a concept for this idea. And so I just tell him, like, oh no, like, I don't have any money, and like, I don't know, like, I don't do that, kind of thing. And he was like, oh no, we'll take you with us, and we'll pay for you. And so I remember I get into, he's 16 years old. He's driving all of his friends. I get in, like, in this big blue Astro van that, like, his parents, like, this old, beat up Astro van that his parents had handed down to him. And we go, I remember I get in there, and this is actually the least thing that I'll share today that changed my life, but I like to say it did. Reliant K was playing for the first time ever in my life that I had heard them, and my life was never the same. They're my favorite band in the entire world still today. And I remember the song was College Kids, and if you don't know that song, you should go look it up, and please don't make me feel old. But I remember thinking, like, this, you can go to church and listen to this music? Like, I remember, like, what is this? So then we go to Perkins, and it's just like, there's nothing extra special about it other than I'm just hanging out with buddies who are hanging out, like, and being funny, making jokes, eating food, talking, and I'm just a part of it. I'm just in it and a part of it. They paid for my food, like, all of these things. And it was so funny. I even remember now, like, there was divvying up of money. I mean, these are teenagers, right? So it's like, okay, do you have a couple bucks? Okay, do you have a couple bucks? Like, I mean, they wouldn't have wanted me to know that they were trying to like pool together the money to pay for me, but they for sure were. Anyway, Caleb then goes to take me home. He drops off a couple of other friends on the way, and then he takes me home. In the trailer court that I lived in, when you dropped me off at my house, you then had to kind of keep driving, go around a roundabout, then come back past my trailer house. And Caleb dropped me off, and I go to walk in, and I have this thought, like, nothing like this has ever happened for me. I don't have friends like this. I don't have experiences like this. And I just, like, honestly, I don't understand what happened here. And so as Caleb comes back around, I go out to the street to stop him before he drives off. And he rolls down his window, and I say to him, Caleb, nobody is kind to me. Like, nobody does this. Like, why did you do this? And Caleb, as a 16-year-old, said what could probably be perceived as one of the more cheesy things you could possibly say, and yet my life is still impacted by it today. Caleb just looked at me and said, "Hey man, we love Jesus and we love you." And all I knew in that moment was that I wanted more of this, and I wanted to know more about that Jesus. And so that started a journey. I mean, at that point, missing Wednesday nights wasn't an option. Caleb started to pick me up so that I didn't have to ever walk in the rain again. He would pick me up. He started picking me up on Sundays for church as well. I went because of my interaction and involvement with the youth group within about that calendar year. I went to a youth conference called Acquire the Fire.
I've been to one of those before.
Yeah, and I think on like the second night, the speaker got up, and this is long before Carrie Underwood, but he talked about giving the steering wheel of your life to Jesus, and letting God be in control of your life. I had never heard or quite understood that I needed to allow him to be in control of my life. And so I said, okay. And I meant it. And I didn't know what that all meant at 7th grade, but I knew that over those last, 6 to 8 months, that the things I had been shown that I didn't know were possible in life, that the friends and the people caring for you in a different kind of way, and the hope that was maybe present in that, I knew that all of these people were saying that all of that was because of this Jesus. And so I said, okay. And that started a journey of just following him. And it was incredible what had happened at that church in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. I think because Caleb, at 16 years old, decided that caring well for a 7th grader who didn't know Jesus was so important to him. Not only did his friends start to follow that and care about me as well, adults and parents in that church started to follow that and care well for me. I think at one point I had upwards of 7 families that cared deeply and were invested deeply into my time and my story. Again, I was living in a really tough situation that didn't have a lot of care or focus from adults. And so I know there were conversations happening amongst 5 to 7 families every weekend. Where is Christian staying? Who's making sure that he's getting to church? Whose house is he staying the night over on these nights? Like, who's helping him figure out his homework? Like, these are conversations that were happening because a 16-year-old boy decided that being kind and sharing the love of Jesus was the most important thing. And so, from 7th grade to about 9th grade, my world was that. Like, I was at church every possibility that there was something going on there. I was with these families every possibility. There were even weeknights during school that I was staying the night at some of these houses. They were stepping into a place and taking care of me in a different kind of way. Clothes, explaining hygiene. I'll never forget Caleb. One of the nights he was dropping me off at my house. I can tell he's nervous. We've been friends for a while now. And I can just tell how nervous he is to talk. And I'm sitting in his van next to him, and he kindly pulls out some deodorant. And he wasn't trying to be mean, and he was trying to step into a spot at 16 years old that a dad had not stepped into and a mom had not stepped into, to say, hey, this is how you use this, and this is why this is important, and I'm not shaming you or making you feel. I just cannot imagine. I at 34 years old would have an incredible hard time doing that with a 7th grader. And here is a 16-year-old stepping completely outside of himself to do those kinds of things. So this is the space that I was in, learning a whole lot more about Jesus, attempting every single day to follow him more and figure out what that meant. In 7th grade.
And I just want to stop for a couple of I have so many things to say, like questions to ask. But one part is like, you start coming to church, you invite God into your life, and home life really didn't change for you. Seeing and hearing about a God who loves you, cares about you, and coming home and sensing this brokenness, how did that play out in your life and your relationship with God?
So I think at that point, the good, both of Jesus and of the environment and community he had set up for me, at that point outside of my home, was just so good and so interesting and so fun for that 7th, 8th, 9th grade boy, that I was just running to that space, and I was just outside of my home space as much as I possibly could be. That kind of came to a head in the fact that in 9th grade, drug use had not subsided for my dad. Some of that had become more aware. Again, I was just trying to be out of it as much as I possibly could, and life for me outside of it was so good that I was just focused and chasing that. And so when some of it came to a head, it was a bit of a wake-up call for me. In 9th grade, in between my 9th and 10th grade year of high school, we were pulled out of my dad's house. My sister and I, and sent to live with my mom in Little Falls, Minnesota, with my mom and my stepdad. And life there was difficult for a few reasons. Number one, moving to Little Falls meant moving away from this community that I had completely dove into. Like, there was nothing else for me except this community. And so moving away from that community, relationship was also really difficult with my stepdad, for a multitude of reasons, and also with my mom. And so when that move happened, I think for lots of different reasons, some from even my own being a 9th grader and not knowing how to cope or handle some of that, as well as some of my parents' decisions. it started a pretty rough year of my 10th grade year. I moved homes 4 times. I lived with 4 different families my 10th grade year of high school, and I went to 5 different schools. And at one point in that, I think it was probably halfway through that, so maybe my 3rd school at that point in 10th grade. At that time, it is Little Falls. I'm at Little Falls High School. Things are rough. Like, I had, previous to that, by the grace of God, previous and since, I have never dealt with thoughts of self-harm, or even been dealing with any sort of like deep depression issues or anything like that. That year, those things were for sure present. And I remember specifically at one point sitting in the lunchroom of Little Falls High School, and in a period of my life, in a time in my life where I was for sure thinking about what hurting myself or even worse would look like. And little did I know on one of those days that there were 2 people in a car in the parking lot of the Little Falls High School. Their names were Matt and Hannah. And Matt and Hannah, I knew because I had been so invested and connected to my youth group and to that church community in Sauk Rapids. And Matt and Hannah were connected to the greater church community through Youth for Christ. They were the 2 of the only employees at that time at Youth for Christ in Minnesota. They had, I think, 3 or 4 years prior to this moment had taken the job. They knew me from overlap and interaction, and then also like in my 8th grade and 9th grade year, while still in Sauk Rapids, I attended a small little group of boys that got together called Band of Brothers.
Wow.
That Matt led with a lot of other really incredible men in our community. And so Matt and Hannah knew me. They also knew that I had moved, and that they had heard through some channels that there was probably a lot of movement and a lot of things. And through some of that movement, they had heard about Little Falls, but they had no idea where I currently was. Was I at Little Falls? Was I at Piers? Was I somewhere else? They're in the parking lot that day because they're about to go and speak to a health class at Little Falls High School. They stopped each other as they were about to go in, and they prayed, "Lord, if Christian is here today, would you help us to see him?" Well, they happen to be walking through the lunchroom at the time that they are going to
that
the health class, and I'm sitting at a lunch table by myself as they walk by. There were multiple lunch periods. Like, there are lots of other times they could have walked through that day and not seen me. They saw me. They had enough margin to sit, to grab lunch, and to have lunch with me that day. And in that time and that conversations, Matt and Hannah reminded me enough of the hope of Jesus that I had been introduced to and had lived in from 7th to 9th grade, for that lost again 10th grader to be reminded, oh, there is hope in Jesus, and these thoughts of self-harm that I'm having are not the answer, and there is hope. Matt and Hannah didn't know I was having those thoughts. I didn't share with them the day that I was having those thoughts. They just reminded me of the hope of Jesus, and that there were people that cared about me still. And so yeah, I mean, things didn't necessarily get easier at that point. There was still lots of moving. Eventually, by 11th grade, just before my 11th grade year had started, I landed with a family who kind of knew of my parents and knew of me in Little Falls, and and knew that the situation was bad and had started praying because they felt like they were going to be involved in the situation at some point. And so when I was kicked out of my house for maybe like the third or fourth time because of disagreements with my stepdad, the summer between my 10th and 11th grade year, and I'm walking down the street, and this lady, Lisa, sees me driving. She just picks me up, brings me to her house, and within a couple of hours, her and her husband come out and say, we'd like you to stay with us. And I lived with them for the next 2 years until I graduated high school from Little Falls High School, where I eventually had friends and people that cared for me, and went to a church where Bobby was my youth pastor. And like,
oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So and got to really step into to understanding how to continue to mature my relationship in Jesus, continue to be surrounded by good community and people that cared well. That eventually leads to an opportunity to volunteer with Band of Brothers, which just felt right and made sense.
It's like perfect.
Know Matt and Hannah and care well. And so volunteering with Band of Brothers, which eventually led to an internship with Youth for Christ, which eventually led to getting to run that program, which just a ton of investment from people like Matt and Hannah and others who you know, I could point to multiple people. Matt and Hannah are one of them, or two of them, but like I could point to multiple people that I for sure met and were invested in my life in 7th grade and still at 34.
Yeah.
Like, and so
and still doing Youth for Christ too.
Yeah, Matt and Hannah are still doing Youth for Christ. I mean, you think about the kind of care and investment in a community and what long-term care and investment in a community. I mean, I've gotten to see firsthand the amount of stories that Matt and Hannah have touched. I'm not the only one that has that kind of story.
Yeah.
I know that's true for Caleb too. I know that the way that Caleb lived impacted way more than just one 7th grader. And yet, if it only impacted one 7th grader, not only is my life changed, but Max's life has changed, Selah's life has changed, Maggie's life has changed, Sheena's life is changed because a 16-year-old boy cared enough to share the good news of Jesus with a 7th grader.
Exactly. And that's also one of the things I wanted to talk about was just many times when we challenge students and we're like, think of 3 friends, think of 5 friends. Many times, you know, they're thinking of people really close to them, like a friendship that they have, like a really close friend. They're thinking about a person on their football team, or someone they're in band with, or someone they sit by in class. I just think it's so amazing that Caleb, a 16-year-old, reaches out to a 7th grader and the power that had. Yeah. And then he was leading the way for people behind him. And so for students out there who are like, hey, I want to see this same kind of experience happen with people at my school, in my community. What would your encouragement be where maybe they've been praying for people and they're not seeing their hearts being opened or anything like that?
Yeah. I think kind of 2 things. I think the power of being kind, like of just really going out of your way to be kind to a person, mixed with the power of an invite. Like, and I don't even just mean like the invite from that one other 7th grader in my story who invited me to youth group that night. Like that invite mattered, but the invite into your space. So like you might invite them to youth group and that might feel like an easy invite, but inviting a student into your friend circle, inviting a student into, you know, you guys are getting together to play games on a Friday night, like those spaces, those for sure changed my story.
Because what did you see in those moments when you weren't at a youth group, but you're with them hanging out? What did you see or what did you feel?
Yeah. Well, one, you you instantly feel a part, right? And so when you are a part of that, like, well, now you start to see things different. When you start to feel a part of something, you start to see things that you wouldn't see before, and you start to feel things that you maybe wouldn't feel before, especially if you feel like you're kind of on the outside looking in. But when you're invited and you're in, well, you start to see, like, yeah, there's a lot of fun and care for each other that's happening amongst these friends, and I feel that. But also, like, if something serious comes up, or they need to talk about something, or wait, they prayed about that thing that somebody's struggling with, or somebody had a problem and they all kind of stopped to help figure that out, or wow, in my other friend circles, if somebody did that thing, everybody would have been mean to them and kind of jumped on them for that thing, and instead there was like care and understanding that person made a mistake. Like, when you get to see all of those things, you get to see the characteristics of Jesus. If you and your friends are following Jesus and you bring in somebody who isn't, that person gets to start seeing Jesus in you. And the best place that we get to see Jesus isn't when he's just in our hearts and not like going anywhere else. It's in relationships and where we interact with others. And so when I'm kind to that person specifically, right, to them, well, they get to, they do get to feel that. But I think there's something very different when they see, like, oh, well, that's how you are to the people you're closest with too, and that's how they are to you, and oh, this is a way of living for you, and they get to really see the different characteristics of Jesus come out. I think that was the most attractive thing to me, was like, oh, this is really different everywhere, and the common theme here is Jesus. Like, oh, why did you do that thing? Why were you kind to that person? Why did you respond that way to that hard situation? Why did you talk to your parents that way instead of being mean or mad at them when they asked you to stop doing something? Like, oh, the common theme here is Jesus. Like, that to me was like the most eye-opening thing, and people don't get to see that if you don't invite them in. Yeah. And so that couldn't have been said any better. That was amazing. I do just have like one or two more questions, and we're going to do a fun little ending of just like ask you some get to know Christian kind of questions. Great. But now with your family, what does life look like for your mom, your dad? What does your relationship with it look like now? When I was a young adult, probably 19 or 20 years old, I didn't really know what that looked like. I think you kind of have a sometimes you're not given the choice. Sometimes other things are made for you or decided for you. But I kind of felt like I had a choice. Am I going to invest in these relationships still, or am I just going to go on my own? And I read a book called Boundaries. It's by, I forget his first name, but Dr. Cloud is his name. Oh, okay. And it just talked about like how to be in relationship with people that are difficult, but also like that if you set up the correct boundaries, there is hope here, or there is opportunity here. And so I remember reading that. It kind of changed my perspective on how I would approach a situation. And so I just started to like invest a little bit more with both of my parents. And so today I have consistent and I would say good relationship with both of them. There are challenges in all of it. My mom lives in Florida, and so that is a challenge, like the distance. But there is good communication there and good connection. And my dad, my dad made a lot of tough life choices. And about 2008, about the time I graduated, my dad got clean, and he started making some very different choices. Wow. My dad actually, I don't need to get into all of this and how it all worked out, but Shin and I felt like through a lot of prayer and a lot of wisdom in our lives, like it was the right move. And so about the same year that we had our first kid, Max, my dad moved into our basement, and he lived with us. And there are still he lived with us until, about 6 months ago.
Wow.
And so he lived with us for about 7 years, 7-8 years. And there are still difficulties in relationship that him and I are always working through. And yet one of the most incredible things about what God does and the restoration and the hope through Jesus is that my kids know him as their papa, and they love him, and he loves them, and he's a good grandpa to them.
That's awesome.
And that didn't get to be the story for him and me and for him as a dad. But through Jesus and through what he's done in my life and through what he did through Caleb, a 16-year-old, there gets to be a really great grandpa for Max and Selah and Maggie.
Wow.
Which again just shows the power, I think, of Jesus and that nothing is beyond restoration for him.
Yeah. So with our students, just if you could leave them with one last thought of encouragement, when we're talking about the power of that invite, what would you just say to any student out there that's like, what can I do? Yeah. The thing that I don't get to know perfectly, although I've had lots of conversations with him and I think I understand it well, is, and I've had it in my own life and other situations, but like that wasn't easy for Caleb. Like none of that was easy. Caleb had to go outside of himself, right? There's risk in even that first night, like bringing a 7th grader with you and your 16-year-old friends to Perkins. Like, how's that going to work? How are we going to hang out? Is this going to feel weird and awkward? and like, there's so many things. I also don't think they had the money worked out. So like, I'm going to tell them we're going to pay for them, but I don't even know if we know how to pay for ourselves. And so like all of that had an element of risk and sacrifice for Caleb. And so I think the biggest amount of advice that I would give is, if you're going to make a lasting impact, if you're going to have a chance at really having a lasting impact, it's going to require some sort of sacrifice or risk. Wow. You're going to have to step outside of there might be people in your friend group that think that you're less cool because you go and sit with that kid at lunch. You might have to risk your reputation. You might have to risk what others say or do because of what you choose to do. You might have to risk being rejected by that person that you reach out to. I mean, I was really receptive at that time to that kindness. There are lots of people who are not, that have been so hurt by this world and so hurt by their family or by other people at your school or whatever, that they aren't receptive. There are people that have been hurt by people that have cared for them. And so you might go and care, and they might think it's just another opportunity for them to be hurt. And so you might risk being rejected by them. They might not want it. They might push back. You are opening yourself up to something when you reach out. And I think knowing that, owning that, and doing it anyway is the biggest hurdle and the most important piece to really make an impact that is, again, not just of this world but beyond. I think the biggest iteration is just like, it's going to cost you something. So my biggest piece of advice when you are making, when you're talking about making that invite and what that looks like, if you really want to make an impact, you're going to have to sacrifice something. And it will be different for everybody. But I think that's the piece that's going to be known. Like, at some point, even as a 7th grader, I knew that Caleb was going outside of himself to care for me. At some point, I knew that Matt and Hannah and these other leaders were going outside of themselves to help and to care for me. When somebody knows that that's what you're doing, when they know that it could maybe cost you something to care for them, whether or not they
they want your help, or they like how you're choosing to help, if they are able to see that this risks something for you, or this is a cost to you, like that speaks more than almost anything that you could do. And I guess what I would say was that is like, I wouldn't like go out of your way to make sure they know the cost, but I think that all speaks out of how you operate and how you act, and it is more noticeable than you think. I was able to pick up on the fact that, like, on a night that Caleb was hanging out with me, one-on-one, a 7th grader, going to Culver's, like, it meant he wasn't with his other friends, and he was giving up something to be with and hang out with me. There's no way that was the most fun thing that Caleb could choose. I mean, a 16-year-old with a car and a little bit of money, like, hanging out with me at Culver's was not the most fun thing he could do. But he had deemed that it was the most valuable thing he could do. And so, yeah, I would just say, be willing to sacrifice something, and then really invite them in, not just to something, not just to an event. When you make that invite them into your story, invite them into your life, and they're going to get to really see Jesus. They might miss Jesus at an event. You could go to an event where they talk about Jesus and they might miss him. It might not connect. It might not work. But man, if they see Jesus in your life and they get to be a part of that, that is a way harder thing to miss.
Okay, so many good parts about your story. A couple things. Invite them not just to church, but invite them into your space. I love how you said that. Another thing that you said that was really, really cool was it is going to take sacrifice in some way. And even though your story looks like that, that may not be how everyone else's story looks. Even though someone is in need of a friend or care, doesn't mean they're always ready to accept it. Absolutely. And I love how you pointed that out, because I think sometimes we hear someone's story and we're like, yes, that's how it could work for me. And it's not always that way. But it's so amazing to hear your testimony. I also love the part of, like, you had this really cool experience 7th through 9th grade. And then it wasn't just like, woo, perfect after that. Like, there was a hiccup. And it's cool how God did not forget about you. He was with you through that whole entire time. And as walking into Little Falls, seeing Hannah and Matt come in, and just this whole God opportunity was just so incredibly amazing to hear. So thank you so much for sharing. I want to say that. For our students who just maybe want to get to know some interesting facts about you, we do 5 quick questions. Okay. So first one is what is number 1 on your Christmas list this year? I kind of already got it. And so like an early Christmas present?
Like a lot of times if there's something that I really want, like Sheena and I will I'll kind of be like, well, I maybe could get this, and then you don't have to don't get me anything for Christmas kind of thing. And so the last few years it's just been all ice fishing stuff, and so anything ice fishing related is absolutely what I want for Christmas. And so I got a new flip over house, and so that's that's the top of my list. And then as kind of a side thing, I'm kind of living vicariously through Max right now because he loves all the things that I love. And so at the top of my list are some Pokemon cards and cool Star Wars Lego sets, because I'll get to experience those the same.
Do those with him. I love that. Okay. Go-to drink. What is your drink of the day that you like to go to? I love coffee. I am beyond obsessed with coffee. And my go-to right now, it changes a little bit, but right now it is an Americano. It just switched from an iced Americano to a hot Americano because we're cold now. And a hot Americano with 2 pumps of sugar-free vanilla, which is really weird. Lots of people wouldn't think that's good. It's great, and I don't do any sort of cream or anything. No cream.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What is one thing most people don't know about you?
Oh, man.
That you can share.
Yeah. What is one thing most people don't know about me? I really enjoy like research of any kind, and so like if I can like kind of like grab onto something to learn more about it, like I can like I'll obsessively learn about that thing for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And my wife very much knows this. She's like, oh, this is what we're on. This is what we're on now. Like, we're going to know everything about this, you know, this thing for the next 3 weeks to a month. And then I'll change to something else. But I very much like that process.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. What do you feel like God is teaching you right now in life?
Yeah. I think he is teaching me, and I think this is something that a lot of us can find in our stories probably all the time, but patience for sure. I think I have a lot of things about maybe even my development as a person that I'm already like, I wish I was further along maybe than I was. I think one of the most obvious ways that that's true is as a parent. The amount of patience I need, not only for my kids, I mean, that's like kind of an easy thing to say, like, oh, as a parent, I need more patience, but like, God is still developing me into the man that he wants me to be. And that will be a process until I go to be with him in heaven. Like, that will be a continuous process. And I, of course, want that to continue to happen and continue to grow. And sometimes I think I want it on my timeline. I want to be further than I am in some areas of development and maturity. And the truth is that there's a process to get there. And so I think a lot of times I want to skip the process and I just want to be there. And that's not what God has for us. Like the process, the things in life that he has for us in order to develop and to get there are all an important piece of it. And so I think really lately, in my time with him, he's been trying to get me to a space of understanding that and being more patient in that.
That's good. Okay, that was only 4 questions. I have one more.
Okay,
is there a book right now that you're really reading or has got your attention?
So one is kind of like personal development kind of book stuff. Anything by Andrew Peterson. He's got actually, I think, only 2 books right now. He's a musician.
Okay.
But he's got 2 books that are both incredible. I would encourage that you go read either one of them, but one of them is called God of the Garden, and he just does an incredible job, I think, of helping us understand our place kind of with God and what that space in the garden was kind of meant to look like and how it looks like today. And so that book by Andrew Peterson is incredible. And then Andrew Peterson also wrote a series, a fictional series called The Wing Feather Saga.
Okay.
And my kids and I are reading that. We're into book 4 and we're almost done. And so those would be the 2 books right now. It's a lot. It's very Andrew Peterson heavy right now, but like that, we're finishing that and it's incredible.
Awesome.
And then you're not supposed to say this on like a Christian podcast, but I'm very excited because my kids and I are going to start Harry Potter soon. And so I'm very excited because
You're a lover of that. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So. Well, Christian, thank you so much for being with us today. Yeah. It has been great to just hear your testimony. And I love how you, it came full circle for you of being helped by people. So then you actually get to turn around and help students who maybe find themselves in similar situations. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. And students, we come out with podcasts every single first of the month. And so we hope you have a great December and we'll see you in the new year. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Minnesota Youth Alive podcast. Remember, you can download the Minnesota Youth Alive app and check us out on Instagram and Facebook for updates and information.